Hi, everyone, and welcome to The X, a podcast from inside Silicon Valley about how experience shapes everything, from products to businesses to entire industries. I'm Brian McLean, and I'm here with Demetrius Madrigal.
Okay, listen up, everyone. Important announcement up here. Big boss talking to her team. Today's a big day. Today is the day that we launch our newest and, if I do say so myself, most beautifully designed new social networking feature. Dinner party. A lot of hard work has gone into this, and now all that's left to do is hit this button.
Where's Ian? Doesn't he usually do the speech?
Yes, Michelle, he does, but I'm doing this one. Because after the whole shovel thing, Ian finally agreed to let me have something that's mine, and that thing is dinner party. It just seems like a natural clapping, whatever. Just don't interrupt.
Oh, so Ian didn't help. That's why the name's so confusing.
It's not confusing, Michelle. What else would you call a feature that allows players to connect across guilds and plan large-scale events?
Have you ever been to a dinner party?
Yes. Hundreds. Can you please stop being so negative and don't interrupt anymore? You know what? I'm just going to skip to the end. Let's launch!
All right, everybody, that was a clip from Mythic Quest, and not all launches go as planned. And so today we're going to talk about a couple of different things. We're going to talk about UX in gaming. Demetrius is going to dig into some controversial stuff that's happening right now with Baldur's Gate 3. And we're going to talk about how Netflix is beta testing its new streaming gaming service. So good morning, Dee. How you doing?
Pretty good. I'm excited to get back into gaming. It's always one of our favorite topics to talk about, partially because I always think of gaming as like the pure experience development. It's like the thing that is just like you're doing it because of the experience that it provides you purely, not because of any utility involved. So it's one of the things that is just super fascinating.
Yeah, it reminds me of television, streaming, all that other stuff too, where it kind of transcends all the different age groups, and also everybody has an opinion about it. And that's kind of something that I like about it. You can go and talk to any gamer or anybody who watches television, and they will always have something to share with you and tell you about. I was thinking, let's start off with the Netflix stuff, because I find this really, really interesting. I have a business hat version of this, and then I have a product hat version of this.
Yes.
So let me kind of explain what's going on here. So it's beta testing its new streaming gaming service. So Netflix's game streaming will work like Xbox Cloud Gaming and Sony PlayStation's Plus Premium, letting players jump right into the game and run off a remote server. And this is really, really interesting because Netflix has a pretty large audience, and we'll talk about that in a second. I'll give you the numbers in a moment. And they're beta testing it right now with only a small group of people in the UK and Canada, which is smart because this is something you want to get correct right out of the gate. You only get one first impression, and gamers can be tough. They can be tough critics. They either like something and they'll run with it and they'll make your business super successful, or they won't like it and then things will tank quite quickly unless you really, really recover in a speedy way. So a couple things about it. Netflix doesn't have a physical controller, as most of you probably know, but what they did is they updated their app so that there's a controller feature on it, which basically turns your phone into the actual controller itself. And right now it's on iOS, and they're using that within their beta. So we're not sure how that will unfold. I mean, there are some games you can definitely play using your phone as the controller itself, but if you talk to true gamers, they're in love with their controllers just as much as contractors in love with their equipment that they use when they're building your house, right? So we'll see how that plays out. But Netflix has also set it up so that you can log into your computer and you can use your keyboard and mouse to play. So that's kind of cool. It's like traditional gaming experience, especially when I was growing up. But let's talk for a second about subscriber numbers. So there's 238 million worldwide subscribers. I mean, that's a large base to have to offer something new, right? So their streaming customers are pretty loyal for the most part. And so they've had a strong base for a really long time. And they do have sweet spot customers. So that 25 to 55, which is where gamers kind of land in the majority. So definitely there's younger gamers and older gamers, but in the majority, they land in that 25 to 55. And it could be a pretty decent hit for them if they do it correctly. But it takes a lot to get there. So D, what are your first thoughts when you hear this before I kind of talk a little bit about some of their other aspirations?
Well, I think that, and I've been saying this for a while, I think it's an uphill battle for Netflix. And the reason why is that there are competitors in the space. You mentioned Microsoft, Sony. We also have Amazon there, and we have Nvidia and Google famously tried this and didn't work out.
Yep.
And the reason why I think it didn't work out for Google is because Google just doesn't have the kind of history in the gaming culture within the company. So that I don't feel like that. And for us talking to our friends over at Google, I don't feel like a ton of them come with this kind of gaming perspective. They're a very data focused company, and that's kind of what they do well. And I feel like with Netflix, they're in the same situation where they're not really coming from a gaming perspective. They're one of the last of these major tech companies to kind of get into it. I think that what they've done so far in gaming is kind of like unremarkable. Mostly just they're kind of mobile games that you don't need Netflix to get.
Yeah.
And I don't know what they bring to the table that's unique and different. That said, doesn't mean they can't do it.
Yeah.
But I think they need to bring in someone, if they haven't already, who really, really understands the space, and then they need to get their basically the leadership off their back and let them do what they need to do in order to make a success.
Yeah, I know that they've purchased a couple studios, small gaming studios, hired executives, a lot of game developers, things like that. So they have a whole team that they're kind of building out. And it's like anything, you start from scratch. It's going to be a rough ride, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think the idea of making it is the big aspiration of creating streaming games in particular is really interesting to me because, as you know, there is one factor that you cannot control in streaming, and that's your internet connection. And that to me is the big question mark. So if you're playing a game and you're in the middle of playing it and suddenly you have a hiccup and it slows you down or whatever it is, that creates a bad experience that's really not your fault, right, as a company, because you're relying on the internet connection in order to provide that. But if you're watching a movie or something like that, yes, it interrupts the experience, but you can just kind of pause it and wait, or pick it up later when your internet connection is stronger, and it doesn't really affect you as much as when you're like in the moment playing a game. So I kind of feel like they're going to be walking this line of like, how many people, let's say worldwide, or even if you just focus on the United States, have a really strong internet connection, reliable connection. And if those people get this gaming platform, not only are they going to enjoy the games that are provided, but are they going to have a good quality experience that is not controlled by us? So how do you manage that? That's a tough one. And I always empathize with companies that are building these amazing experiences on top of an internet connection because, I've had times where I'm on Zoom or whatever it is, we're in the middle of a really intense meeting and suddenly it just cuts out and you're like, oh, and the first thing it goes to is like, oh, Zoom. And it's really not Zoom. It's the internet provider that I have outside that just decided that they want to do maintenance without telling me. Right. And so that's a big question mark. Also, the other side of it is whether or not they're going to actually be able to grab games that people are very familiar with and already love. So right now they're going to be limited to just 2 games. I'm not actually familiar with the first one, a gem mining arcade game called, is it Molehew's Mining Adventure? And then Oxenfree. So they're not super graphics heavy, is what I've read. So it might work well for them to start off. But they reported last year that their aspirations are to actually get AAA games on the platform, first and third person shooters with the Unreal Engine. So that's a big step up.
So this is basically what they need. So the gaming space, especially when it comes to kind of this level of like subscription service platform kind of stuff, really turns on AAA and exclusive titles. So which isn't to say that every game should be AAA. Maybe that absolutely shouldn't be the case. You just have to have a few anchor titles like what's it like Legend of Zelda: Tears of the Kingdom, right?
Yep.
That's like this AAA exclusive title that is kind of an anchor for the platform. So that's they need some stuff like that, and then they need to open it up and have like a full gaming library. And I think that when it comes down to it, this is something that Netflix absolutely needs. I think that they've kind of hit it's kind of hit a ceiling a little bit when it comes to their streaming content. I think they had a not the best of a content strategy when it comes to filling out their library over the last few years. I think they're just pumping out a lot of very generic, for lack of a better word, crap. And we saw recently that they had a kind of a downward movement in users for the first time in their history. So for them to open up this entirely new category with gaming, considering that gaming is actually a much bigger industry than movies, uh, is essential to them. So we'll see if they can pull it off. Microsoft did it when they came in. They were not a gaming company.
Nope.
They did some very smart things. They bought Mojang, which makes
Hmm.
Microsoft, and they bought Bungie and made Halo. So those are big, big investments, and it still took Microsoft a long time to really break into the market because the first Xbox was not a huge success. So I think it'll be interesting. I think it's good to have. I think this kind of cloud gaming service thing where you're not kind of tied to hardware per se is the future. I do think that they need to either have their own controller or allow third-party controllers to be used so that they're, you know, uh, that is one of the things that people really want is somebody might say, I really like the Xbox controller. I really like the Amazon Luna controller. I really like this other controller. They kind of have to be allowed to use whatever controller they want. Just let them pair it through Bluetooth and get to it. So
So
I think that,
how do you imagine that the controller actually works? Like if I'm just using only my television and I have like a Roku or a Chromecast system set up or something like that, how would you imagine that would work?
well, whether you're using a smart TV or whether you're using some kind of a dongle or set-top box kind of thing, it just has a Bluetooth built-in connection built into it. We know
Okay,
that's
so
cheap.
just
Most of these devices have Bluetooth built into it already,
yeah,
so you just need to get the software in place in order to allow it to integrate. And then for the major market ones, the ones that are well known, it just recognizes, okay, this is an Xbox Series X controller that's attached. That I know what the button layout is. Here are the defaults for that. A lot of like Steam, for example, if you connect to an Xbox controller, it'll just say, okay, well, I know it's an Xbox controller. Here are all the default controls for all the different games, and off we go.
yeah, no, I love that idea. Like, I personally would rather have a physical controller. I could just put it next to my remote. It just sits there. You just turn it
Yeah,
on, and instantly you start playing games. From the service. From a business perspective, put my business hat on for a second. I think it's a smart move. I think as a big company, you have to constantly be growing, and I'm not talking about just growing subscribers, but like growing new categories of offerings for your customers, right? And
yeah,
so to think about gaming, so they are in the entertainment business and they're in the tech business, right? So within that large bubble, it would make sense considering that those gamers are most likely, at least a percentage of them, watching shows that are on Netflix, familiar with the brand, familiar with the platform, all that kind of stuff. It makes logical sense that you would move into that space. Now, if I put on my product hat, I would say that I'm like 50-50 on the ability to do it in a lean way versus having to get like a real big, strong team and like pull people from some of the other companies that exist
yeah,
that are in this space to get the help that they need. And the reason why I say that is because with Google, I 100% agree with you. Like they failed at this task of getting their platform, streaming platform off the ground, but it didn't feel right. It was like Google's this huge, big analytics company, self-driving car company, like, and suddenly they're just trying to tackle something that isn't in their kind of wheelhouse. Is it possible? Totally. But for whatever reason, they shut that down and it isn't there anymore. With Netflix being in the entertainment space, it kind of feels right. It's like, okay, I could see this happening. But ultimately, you and I know what it really comes down to. Building the actual platform to allow engagement and building controllers and apps and all that stuff, that's the easy part. Even though it's a ton of work and a ton of hard work, it's technically the easy part. It's getting the games, getting the actual experience of that game on the screen and having people love it and be excited by it. And that's kind of out of their hands a little bit. So they could like buy a studio, they can kind of produce their own games, but you're kind of starting from scratch, almost like deciding that you're going to take a script and start produce a movie, right? It's like you
Hmm.
never know if it's going to really be a hit. What you need is a couple anchor games that are so good and so smooth and so amazing. It drags people on the platform, and then you keep building games over time and hope that a few more of them hit. And just it just it takes a while, right? It probably takes
Yeah.
5-10 years, right, to get that whole thing off the ground. But from a business perspective, it seems like it makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, it does. I mean, for them to continue to kind of progress as a company. So, aside from like growth and economic growth and things like that, which I think at some point you have to understand that you're just not going to be a continuously growing company forever. It's just not possible. It's not the nature of the user base, right? Eventually, you top out. You need to kind of progress as a company creatively in order to keep people engaged. And even if that doesn't necessarily mean to subscriber growth, if you don't, then your platform is going to dwindle. So it's just going to, you can imagine if you were still using a iPhone 3GS and stuff because the Apple didn't progress creatively, then everybody would have moved on. So this is something where even to remain relevant, they need to continue to progress. And with all of the strikes and everything going on there, and the fact that they haven't really worked out the economics of their streaming platform as well as they probably should. The gaming side of things has a chance to really kind of even things out and give them what they need, which is a shot of engagement from the users
Mm-hmm.
and interest, and potentially more revenue. Which it's just part of the game is you got to have revenue in order to keep going.
Absolutely. And game development is not cheap. It's like making a movie, right? It's like incredibly expensive.
Yeah.
And it takes, in some cases, I think you told me some games took 5 years to produce, right?
Yeah, some of them take years and years. I mean, movies famously do the same thing. They take years and years to develop. They don't take as long to shoot for sure.
Uh-huh.
But some of these movies, famously, like Unforgiven, was worked on for decades. Martin Scorsese worked on Gangs of New York for decades before it got made. Like these are all things that happen with games too,
Uh-huh.
and it takes a similar amount of people to actually develop it, and then it's got to be. You can't just design it and shoot it. You actually have to code it too.
Yeah, and for whatever reason, I'm rooting for them. Like I really do feel like that would be such a cool transition. I like the idea of like you're watching Netflix or something and you're hanging out and then suddenly you click on gaming, grab the controller and you're playing a game. It's like I like that kind of like integrated experience stuff when it works really well. So we'll track and see how it goes. It's not available in the U.S. yet, but
Yeah.
when beta does come out, I might apply and see if I can get it because I think that would be pretty cool to give it a shot. And then I can give everybody a a full review from me actually playing the games and seeing how well it goes. But let's talk about our second topic of the day here, which is Baldur's Gate 3 and kind of everything that's going on with this, which is you sent this over to me. I was not aware that this kind of was happening, but it seems kind of weird to me. But I want you to kind of explain kind of what is actually occurring.
All right. So Larian Studios released Baldur's Gate 3, and it's kind of disrupting gaming and causing some heated reactions from gaming studios and some media heads and gamers going back and forth. So basically, what happened was they released Baldur's Gate 3 earlier this month, I think around August 3rd. And it's the latest in kind of a Dungeons and Dragons game franchise. It received rave reviews and it had runaway success. And they did this by essentially giving gamers what they want. They had solid functionality out of the box, didn't require any major patches just to fix it and make it playable, has no microtransactions, and while it does have bugs, it's relatively bug free relative to what's been out there. Now, for context, it's important to understand because you hear that and you're like, okay, well, that sounds like what you would kind of expect, right? And it comes, you get it, and it works. But that hasn't been what's happening as much recently. So recently, there's been a trend of some AAA games, such as Cyberpunk 2077, is probably the most famous one. Star Wars Jedi Survivor, at least on PC, And The Last of Us PC version, which was released alongside the TV show, it was probably rushed in order to get it out to align with that. They were all released in basically an unplayable state. So people were putting down 60, $70, and it was just you can look up all the, just go to YouTube and look up all the bugs and stuff. It became definitely a meme, but you're charging this money for something that's not done. And it is unacceptable. So, for them to release something that is playable, stable, ready to go, that was comment worthy, which is a sad thing. On the other side of things, for games that are released and are in a stable and playable state, like Diablo 4, they're so bogged down with microtransactions that it can kill the goodwill for the game. And some devs, one of the examples I've seen is Xavier Nelson. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. Xavier Nelson Jr., who's a indie game developer, kind of pushed back and said, maybe in some frustration, maybe in a bit of concern about his work being a little bit compared to some of the stuff. And it shouldn't be, because he's an indie developer. He's not a AAA major title. That's not to expect for what Larian has done with Baldur's Gate 3 to be reproduced. Don't think it's unreasonable to expect it. The problem with that is it's still technically possible, at least for AAA games. You can look at some of the recent successes: Legend of Zelda, Tears of the Kingdom, Elden Ring, God of War. Those are some recent examples of stuff that went out. It was finished. Yes, there were some patches, and yes, there was some downloadable content, but it kind of fit this mold. And every time it gets released, something like this does very well. And from there, what we saw is one of the things that kicked this off is I saw a video from game writer and YouTuber Alana Pierce. She weighed in on and basically explained that what the devs are saying is that they're limited by what their publishers like Activision or EA, who oftentimes end up owning these game development studios, will allow them to do within their process, because they're dictating the release dates, how they're released, all these kinds of things. And if the developers aren't doing what the publishers want them to do, then they can get the studio shut down.
So you're talking about like business decisions over product decisions again.
Yes.
Yeah. So I have a couple questions here that are ruminating in my mind. So first is, so this company that produces Baldur's Gate, Larian Studios, they decided to do something super crazy. They delivered a product that their customer wanted.
Mm-hmm.
So they gave them they gave them exactly what they wanted, which is none of those microtransactions, super good experience, real clean, out of the box, ready to rock and roll. And everybody else is like, whoa, 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 don't expect that from us.
Well, the issue is that I think that here's the thing, is that when a game comes out like this and it doesn't do well, the gamers will go after will blame the studios. And the studios will push back and say, hey, you don't understand. And it's true, they don't. It doesn't matter. They don't need to understand. This happens to us a lot within the tech industry. And the reality is that what product and design and engineering want to do is not always what gets done. And that's because of decisions made by leadership. And a lot of times those are things like monetization, or the ways in which things get monetized, or the way things get done. I don't imagine you can take Twitter, for example. A lot of what's being done now, a lot of what's being done before Elon's acquisition was not necessarily what a lot of the product and development people there wanted to do. They kind of at some point have to follow orders from the people who control the resources. And the people who control the resources are ultimately beholden to the board of the stockholders. And the board of the stockholders, most of them are controlled by institutional buyers who own large amounts of stock and they don't really care about the product because they are a company, an organization who is almost entirely judged by their ownership by kind of profit and loss and or these days more revenue growth than P&L. So they're being judged. These are all humans involved, right? That's an important thing to keep in mind. So the people who are making a lot of the decisions on the board level, they have essentially bosses who are also evaluating them. So they need to do a good job in their job. And that kind of trickles down to serving two different masters as far as like trying to get all the revenue in and all these things. And then at the same time, on the product side, the product people saying, we know what needs to be done in order to deliver a good product or deliver a good game. And I think one of the disconnects that it constantly happens within our industry, and sounds like within gaming also, is that if you build a good product and you build in an appropriate modernization from the beginning, then you don't have to do all of this monetization kind of gymnastics in order to get it to a point where it is profitable. Um, and that's kind of how games have gone for a very long time. Like Nintendo did not go broke making games without microtransactions for decades.
Yeah, but I think you get used to the microtransactions producing hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue a year, and then you're like, well, I don't want to remove that because one game was super successful and everybody loves that there's no microtransactions, but our game is producing so much revenue. It's like, how do you expect me to just suddenly cut that off, right? And one thing I got to give Steve Jobs credit for was that he always talked about this. Like, he was always trying to cut through the noise and just deliver the best experience possible.
Yeah.
There's always some negotiation that happens, but like for the most part, fighting the good fight, being the person, ultimately the person in charge really is the advocate or the leader of the users, right? That's how it should be, and fight for that. I don't think it should be right that that you can even release something that has so many bugs. I mean, I thought we've gotten
Yeah.
past that. We used to do that a long time ago in the tech industry. It's like we release stuff and our users become our beta testers. But like now they're starting to walk away from that because people get annoyed. There's a lot of options. People could just jump off whatever you're doing and go find someone else to do it. And I feel like the way to do it is to take more time, get things worked out, and do what Larian Studios did and just release something that's great that people love. And now look at all the attention they're getting. And it's just something that I hope matures over time because I'm kind of getting tired of it. I recently downloaded an app the other day for a product that I'd purchased, a hardware product, and I won't mention what it is, but I downloaded the app and I put it on and it was like update required, update required, update required. It's like,
Yeah.
I just got that. You just produced this and it's already
Yeah.
tons of updates that are required because they're finding bugs and problems, obviously, right? So, not that the app needs to be updated. I know that needs to be updated because of the changes in the app store and stuff like that. But I mean, just product updates, and you're like, wow, you can release something and then just fix on the fly. And sometimes it's okay, a few things, but like a ton of things that don't even allow you to properly use your product right out of the box. I don't know. It should be not allowed, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, there have been a bunch of lawsuits. I think that CDPR, the company that made Cyberpunk, they got sued. There were a few other companies that got sued for kind of like for misrepresenting what their product was when they sold it. There's a bunch of things. This is a bit of a complex thing. Again, everybody who's involved with this is a human, so
Yeah.
and most people aren't necessarily looking at this as like, oh, let's just kind of fleece people for as much as they can. It is for the most part people saying like, all right, well, let's try to deliver a good product experience and also make some money at the same time. But between those two kind of sometimes competing priorities, some people lean one way and some people lean the other. And I think there's this really unfortunate thing that happens. And as soon as I describe it to you, you're going to say, oh, yes. And that is when you have a platform that begins to struggle, um, platform game, whatever you want to call it. You have a platform that starts to struggle as far as the user base, like you start to have declining users. There is an instinct that I think people need to fight against, to double down on monetization to make up for it so that their numbers don't look bad when they have to go in front of the board the next time.
100%. Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think that's the wrong thing to do. I think you have to go the opposite direction. I think you need to scale back a little bit on monetization, get the users back, and then slowly work some monetization back in a very responsible way and something that doesn't feel like you're dumping a bunch of monetization on them all at once. And that is ultimately the answer. But if you start chasing them away by dumping all tons of microtransactions, taking away content like some games have done, so they're forced to buy others, then you're just going to drive them further away.
Well, I think it's just human behavior, right? Like I think about how if you probably looked at it, in comparable to just the people who are like the healthiest and doing the best seem to be the ones that get a good night's rest, work out every day,
Mm-hmm.
eat healthy, right? And then the people who are like falling behind and things aren't going great try to play catch up, right? And a lot of times when we try to play catch up, we're like, oh, what is the fastest way to lose weight or the fastest way to gain muscle? It's always the fastest instead of just
Yeah.
the right way to do it. And like it's the same thing in business, right? It's like, oh, we got to hurry up and have a silver bullet real quick to fix all of the problems that have been happening for 3.5 years. Right. And
Yeah, it
instead
doesn't work that way.
you have to do the hard work that you're talking about, which is, okay, take a pause. What are the real problems? Let's fix those first. We're going to lose revenue for X number of quarters. And then we're going to emerge doing X, Y, and Z. And let's just get on it. Let's just get up and get on it. Right. And I feel like that's what actually needs to happen. And I think great companies do that and kind of suffer through challenging times when decisions don't lead them to making the best decisions. I mean, we've all done it. We've all made decisions where it didn't work out and we put tons of effort into something and we're like, oh man, now I got to turn around and start all over again. But that's just part of business. It's hard, right? But like I look at this with gaming and it's like, of all the gamers I've interviewed or met, I could tell you they just have snap judgments on things. So like when you get a new game, even if the game is considered great, but then you have 15 updates, you have to wait 15 minutes and it breaks or those types of things, it erodes their confidence over the long term. So
I think
it
that's happening.
sticks.
I think that's happening in real time right now with Blizzard. With Overwatch 2, Overwatch 1 won a bunch of Game of the Year awards. Overwatch 2 is now, I believe, the lowest rated game on Steam in history.
Yep.
Because of how poorly they've done it. And I feel like there was a time I remember when people would say to me, Blizzard never releases a bad game. It just doesn't happen.
I remember that, yeah. Like 2004 or 5, yeah.
Yeah. Now things have changed. And part of it, I think, probably is the Activision acquisition. You look at Larian, they're independent. They're not small, which a lot of people assume when you hear the term independent.
Mm-hmm.
But they do not have. They're not owned by EA or Ubisoft or Microsoft or anybody else. They're making their own decisions. So within that, they can make the choice to say, okay, we're gonna do a bunch of quick hitters that are going to go out there and bring in some revenue. I don't know that this is the case, but they have the ability to do that. They can release some quick hitters and then have some big prestige titles, which I think happens a fair amount within the movie industry. But whether or not you're going for a gigantic Elden Ring, Baldur's Gate 3 size game, or you're doing something much more manageable within a limited scope, you should still aim to develop something that is good and complete at the point of release.
Yeah, I would agree with that. The other thing I was going to say is that it almost begs the question of like, is it better for some of these studios just to stay as independent, non-public companies, right? If you're producing really great stuff. And I know that the reason they do it is because they have hardworking employees and they would love for them to go public so they can kind of have liquidity and make some money and that kind of stuff. I get that part, but I mean, I'm just as a mental exercise of like, when you're independent, you don't have anybody telling you like you need to make X percentage growth every quarter all the time. I wonder if your creativity just bubbles up higher than your need to have the strongest financials every quarter.
Yeah, and I don't think anybody within our industry, whether who's on the product side, really thinks about like, oh, we're going to achieve X amount of growth with what we're developing. I think that just kind of like hampers the creative process. I think that's probably the same case with games.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, definitely.
You said something I think is really important to kind of focus on a little bit, in that A lot of leadership and the board these days are judged on growth, not
Yep.
on profitability or revenue. So that means that you could be the biggest company in the world, and if you show zero growth, even though you have the most revenue of any company in the world, if you show zero growth, stockholders are going to be angry because the stockholders don't make their money based on how much the stock is worth. It is how much the stock appreciates.
Hmm.
Because if somebody bought it, if somebody bought Tesla at $400 a share and now it's $300 a share, they aren't happy that they own a stock that's $300 a share. They're upset that they own a stock that's lost them $100 a share.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, and it makes sense because that decision is not being made from a product point of view. It's made from a financial point of view, right? Like anything, right? Like nobody tells you
Yeah,
like, oh, buy an investment and then hope it goes down. No, the whole point of buying an investment is so it can go up and you can make money and then do things with your family or whatever it is. And it's like that the point of view at that moment, that slice, when you're staring at that, like you said, $400 stock isn't, I really hope that they fix that problem with the door, right? Like it's
yeah,
just your brain is not there. So you rely on the company and the people within the company in order to focus on that. And then they use your money in order to make that stuff a reality, right? And so I understand the perspective of like, I just want the stock to go up, but that perspective doesn't come with you showing up every single day, obviously, and building the product. When you get in the room, like we do with the people who are building the product, their obsessiveness and stress and anxiety is around, I want to build something amazing. I want people to say, this was the most fun I've ever had on a game, or this game changed my life. I had a blast. They don't necessarily want someone to say, thanks for making this game. I made an extra $100 on the stock. So the perspective is
yeah.
completely different at different times. But we have to appreciate both because one funds the other and the other one allows the other one to exist. So it's funny. It's one of those things that I have that mental exercise about all the time where I'm always thinking about it when a merger happens. Like someone's like, this major company is buying this other major company. And it's tough because you have two leaders now because the big company that bought the smaller company is now dictating to the smaller company certain things for a reason because they're doing an
Hmm.
integration, right? And then the smaller company is still trying to fight the good fight of creating the great product. So it actually becomes even
Yeah.
more complicated.
Well, I think fundamentally, if someone is like kind of in the ownership class, if they're an investor, especially and it's not even usually the individual investors, right? They're not owning these stocks to such an extent that they're really pushing kind of the direction. It's more the institutional buyers, uh, because at the end of the day, those people are not really qualified in order to make the decisions about on a product level. They're not
Sure.
working
Yeah.
within that. Somebody who's a financial analyst at Goldman Sachs doesn't know how to make games, especially doesn't know how to make games to a level that's going to be both profitable and successful. So it's one of those things where they they in order to fix something like this, they need to find a new way of working together
Yeah.
where they are delivering what the users want and not just tanking the brand, which happens sometimes. But sometimes people will come in and own something and basically intentionally tank the brand so that they can cash in on the short term. So their goal is like, all right, I'm going to cash in as much as I can over the next 24 months, and then I'm going to jettison this and let it be somebody else's problem. That happens. It's uncommon, but it happens.
Yeah. No, totally.
Um, they need to understand that if a company like Larian is doing really well, if they're doing really well financially, if they're putting out great product and all these things, and somebody acquires Larian, and it's not necessarily up to the game developers whether the company gets acquired, but if somebody acquires it, they need to understand if it's not broke, don't fix it. And
Yeah.
everything that you're reading in the trades about like what Activision is doing in order to make their money, just don't impose that process on them. Let them do what they do. They've done it very well. They've demonstrated their capability. Just kind of leave them alone.
Yeah, Microsoft's actually done a pretty good job at this. When they acquire companies, they kind of leave the company alone and the company runs independently and then slowly over
Hmm.
time they might have like little stitch integrations that happen. so that like, you're using one product and so it connects really beautifully to the other and that kind of stuff. They've actually done, I feel like they've done a good job of doing that. I mean, they've definitely made mistakes in the long past, but like more recently, I think a lot of these companies are realizing exactly what you said, which is keep it as is, let it do its job. I mean, same thing with Minecraft, right? It's like there hasn't
Hmm.
been any major problems as far as I could see, and we play Minecraft every week here.
Yeah.
With Minecraft, it feels like it's same old Minecraft from a long time ago, but they're owned by Microsoft, right?
Yeah, I think it was one of the things that you come from with Microsoft is they don't panic. Like a lot of other companies, like, oh, hey, this thing is starting to struggle, and they might panic and do that thing where they look for the quick solution, and then you end up with uh, Poochie on The Simpsons or something like that,
Yeah,
right? They look for a quick fix, or they double down on revenue in order to hide their problems, and it just doesn't work. And Microsoft, being a company that's been around for a long time, who's very secure and very patient, I think, are the ones who avoid running into that problem quite as much as some others.
Absolutely. Well, with that said, I think this is a wrap for today. Had a little bit of a shorter episode, but two really interesting topics that will continue to follow. Thank you, everyone, for taking the time to listen to us. We really appreciate it. If you'd like to leave us a comment, please go to our YouTube page at the X Podcast and leave a comment. We check all of them. It's kind of slow to adopt on the YouTube page, but we just wanted to give it as an option for other people to be able to listen to the podcast outside of a podcast player. So we're kind of rolling with it. Anyways, all right, everyone, thank you so much, and we will see you all next week.